Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third and final lesson on theory. Here I have written a C major triad. I think you're pretty familiar with this by this point. It contains a root, a third, and a fifth. Now, at the last lesson, we started to talk about chord progressions, and we talked about a couple of different simple chord progressions using triads. Now, because this is a jazz camp, we need to look a little past triads. To be perfectly honest, very few jazz songs use triads. Most jazz musicians and composers and players and so forth use triad. And today we're going to talk about seventh chords. But beyond that, I want to just point out just how far we can go extending chords. We use what's called a torsion system, T-E-R-T-I-A-N, which builds chords up in thirds. Case of the ones we've talked about, we have a root, a third, and a fifth. If we were to continue one more, a seventh. So this is what we call a seventh chord, and we're going to come back and describe each of the 5 types of seventh chords in just a moment here. But just so you know how far you would go if you continue in a more advanced theory, if I continue beyond that, I get what's called a ninth, and this would be called a ninth chord. If I continue beyond that, and I'm going to make that an F sharp because it sounds better than the F natural, this is an 11th chord, and then finally, I would get to the 13th. Now, if you're starting to say, whoa, that's a lot, that's all there is. And the reason for that is if I went one more, I would be back to the same note as the root. So we don't do that. What we basically do is we go as far as the 13th. The biggest chords that you will study in the most advanced jazz harmony are 13th chords. And in fact, the name of this chord that I just wrote here is a C major 13th sharp 11. And that's as big as it gets. Let me play that one for you. It's a very big, colorful chord, and that's something, if you're interested in these type of chords, keep studying jazz theory after this camp. It's a lot of fun and a lot of interesting stuff. What we're going to do here, though, is just talk about seventh chords. And if you get a good grip on what seventh chords are, you're going to do fine, because we can learn a lot about how chord progressions work by just talking about seventh chords. When we add ninths and 11ths and 13ths, we add color to those progressions, but the basic function of the progressions remains the same. So we're going to talk about 5 types of seventh chords. And like we did with the triads, we're going to use the major scale as our ruler or our yardstick, if you will. So these are what we call seventh chords. Okay, there's something called a major seventh chord. A major seventh chord is 1, 3, 5, and 7 of a major scale. A major seventh chord, 1, 3, 5, 7 of a major scale. And I'll play each one of these for you in a few minutes. A dominant seventh chord is 1, 3, 5, and flat the 7, lowered seventh of a major scale. A minor seventh is 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7 of a major scale. Then we have something that is called a half diminished seventh chord. That is 1, flat 3, flat 5, and flatted 7th of major scale. And then finally, we have something called a diminished 7th, or sometimes called a fully diminished. And that's going to be 1, flat 3, flat 5, and watch out, doubly flatted 7th. Okay. I'll give you an example or two in just a moment, but the doubly flatted 7th means that you lower the 7th note by 2 half steps. So we start with a major 7th, we go 1, 3, 5, 7 of a major scale. If I lower the 7th, I get a dominant 7th. If I lower the 3rd and the 7th, I get a minor 7th. If I lower the 3rd, 5th, and 7th, I get what's called a half diminished 7th chord. And if I lower the 1st, or lower the 3rd, 5th, and I doubly lower the 7th by 2 half steps, I get what's called a diminished 7th chord. Okay, let me write up some examples of these and play them for you so you can hear what they sound like. Again, 5 types of 7th chords. I will also talk to you a little bit about the chord symbols that we're going to use for them. As I mentioned in the first lesson, chord symbols are very important in jazz and pop music as a shorthand way of notating what we would like to hear. And then piano player, guitar player will put in different voicings to create that particular sound. So I'm going to give you the spelling of each one of these chords, and I'm going to give you some of the chord symbols that we typically use for them. All right, the first one, and again, all of these are going to start on C, is the major 7th, okay? Remember I said that was 1, 3, 5, 7 of a major scale. Sounds like this. That is a C major 7th chord. Now, common chord progressions we use for that, I like to use MA7. Some people will use just a big capital M7. I would be very careful of that because you got to make sure the 7 is really big. MAJ7 is okay. Now this is one that in the past, back in the 1970s, people got into the idea of using a triangle to indicate a major 7th chord. You will see that from time to time. I don't recommend using this because not everyone recognizes it. But if you see a triangle, it refers to a major 7th chord. All right, so that is one of the 7th chords. Now the next type of 7th chord is the dominant 7th chord. Now dominant 7th chord is 1, 3, 5, lowered 7th. Okay, that is called the dominant 7th chord. Now that is a C dominant 7th chord, and the chord symbol you need for C dominant 7th is that, period. C7 means dominant 7th, and I'll explain in a moment why that is. There's several different names or different chord symbols for the major 7th, but C7 is the accepted chord symbol for a dominant 7th, all right? A minor 7th would be 1, lowered 3rd, and lowered 7th. Here's the chord symbol I like to use for that. Some people, and as I mentioned this in the first lesson, talking about triads, people use a dash for minor. That's a minor 7th. M-I-N-7, possibly M-I-7. Any of these are acceptable. I wouldn't use this today, but if you see that in a chart, I understand that that's going to be a minor 7th chord. All right, now the next one is the half diminished 7th chord. And as I told you, I lower the 3rd, I lower the 5th, and I lower the 7th. Now in traditional classical theory, that is the chord symbol that we use for that is a circle with a slash through it. In jazz and pop music, we typically call this a minor 7, flat 5. Because that's what it is. Here's our minor 7. Here's our minor 7 with a flat 5. Okay, so this chord here is sometimes in more traditional theory called a half diminished seventh. For our purposes, we very often will refer to it as a minor 7 flat 5. And then finally, we have the diminished 7th chord. And the chord symbol for that is that. Now notice I've got a root, a flatted 3rd, flatted 5th, and a doubly flatted 7th. B double flat, you may be thinking, what is a B double flat? B double flat sounds on a piano like an A. And very often people write that as an A, but as I was talking about in the first lesson, theoretically, if you're in a theory class and you're asked to write a diminished 7th chord, make sure that you indicate it as some kind of 7th. It has to be some kind of B over the C, so in this case, it's a diminished or doubly flatted 7th. Okay, so let me play each one of these for you. Here's the C major 7th, C dominant 7th, minor 7th, minor 7 flat 5 or half diminished, and fully diminished or diminished 7th. Once again, major 7th, dominant 7th, minor 7th, minor 7 flat 5 or half diminished, and fully diminished. Those are the 5 types of 7th chords in pretty much every style of music. So this is a good thing to be looking at. Now, before I erase these, I want to just point one quick thing out. You notice that if I want a major 7th, I have to write MA or maybe a triangle. Minor 7th, I have to write an M or a dash. For the half diminished, I have to have the circle with the slash or write this. I have to write this for this. If I want a dominant 7th, all I have to do is put 7. So why is that? And part of the reason is that in some ways it's probably the most common 7th. When people start writing simple music with triads and they start adding 7ths, this tends to be the first 7th that they add. People start adding this one before these others. But more importantly, this is the first 7th chord that people used in Western music hundreds and hundreds of years ago. People started out writing music with triads, and the dominant 7th chord was the first 7th chord that was added, and it became the 7th. And it wasn't for quite a while, in some cases hundreds of years, before, for example, they started using the major 7th. So just a little bit of music theory and history background. The dominant 7th chord was the first one, and it's still a very, very important chord. Okay, let me erase this, and what I'd like to do is go back to the harmonized scale that we looked at in the second lesson with triads. And as you recall, the first triad in a key was a major triad, the 1 chord. The 2 chord is a minor triad. The 3 chord is a minor triad. 4 chord is a major triad. 5 is major triad. 6 is minor triad. And 7 is a diminished triad. If this is a little confusing, you don't remember this, maybe go back and watch the second lesson again, because the next thing I'm going to do is to expand upon these. Okay, so if I add a 7th to each one of these, what I'm going to have is the diatonic 7th chords. Of C major. And again, this is something you're going to need to eventually, not for this camp, but eventually learn these in all the other different keys. Today we'll just look at this for the key of C. If I build a 7th, a triad on each one of those, and I add a 7th to each one, interesting thing happens. This is a major 7th. The 2 chord, or D minor, is a minor 7th. 3 is a minor seventh. 4 is a major seventh. 5 is a dominant seventh. 6 is a minor seventh. And 7 is a minor 7 flat 5, otherwise known as a half diminished seventh chord. So these are the diatonic seventh chords of C major. Here's C major. In fact, let's go ahead and put these. 1 7 is a major 7. 2 7 is a minor 7. 3 7 is a minor 7. 4 7 is a major 7. 5 7 is a dominant 7. 6 7 is a minor 7, and 7 7 is a half diminished. Let me play these for you. Here is C major 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And these are the chords that we use if we want to create a progression that is in the key of C. Now take a look at this for a moment. When we had triads, we noticed that the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord were all major triads. In the case of these, the 1 chord and the 4 chord are major sevenths. The 5 chord is a dominant seventh. All right, I'll come back to that in a moment. The 2 chord, the 3 chord, and the 6 chord are minor sevenths. The 7 chord is a half diminished seventh. But once again, take a look at this. The only place we find a dominant seventh chord in a major key is on 5. Now think about that for just a moment. It's very powerful, and this is one of the things in tonal music. We very often use the dominant chord to define a key. When you hear a G7 chord, your ear says, oh, I must be in the key of C. And if you think about it, if you know your scales, you know that every scale that has sharps in it has an F sharp. Every scale that has flats in it has a B flat. So the only scale that's going to have an F natural and a B natural is going to be C, which has no flats and sharps. Again, the dominant seventh chord, as you look forward in your study of theory, you're going to find that the dominant seventh chord is a very important chord. In fact, the name dominant kind of suggests that, doesn't it? So once again, the 1 chord and the 4 chord are major sevenths. 2, 3, and 6 are minor sevenths. Dominant seventh on 5, and the 7 is a half diminished. Take a look at those for a moment. I'm going to erase this and look at a few chord progressions just to finish out our study. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple of chord progressions. If I saw a chord progression that said C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7. Sounds like this. I'm in the key of C. This is a 1 chord. This is a 2 chord. You can put the 7 on or not, it's your choice. That is a 1, 2, 3, 4 chord progression in the key of C using seventh chords. Remember the frozen, or excuse me, the ice cream changes that I gave you? That was going to be something like C. If I do this with sevenths, it's going to be A minor 7. So here's C major 7. Sounds very similar to the other progression we played for you, but in this case we have the sevenths that are added to it. If I ever see a progression where I just have two major seventh chords, that is the 1 to 4 in the key of C, and it just sounds like this. Okay. If I had a progression that went like this, this is in the key of C, and this is a 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. 3, 6, 2, 5, and 1. Okay, and any progression, you can look at it in these terms, and any progression you can figure out what key it's in and put the Roman numerals over it and start to get an idea of it. Now at this point, everything we've done is in the key of C. Again, I need to express to you, you need to learn these in the other keys as well. For example, if I was writing a tune in the key of C, and this was the progression I was using, and I discovered it was a little bit too high. Let's say the melody went about 1 step too high. Well, then I moved the whole thing down to B flat. I would transpose the entire thing to B flat, in which case my 3 chord in B flat is going to be a D minor 7. My 6 chord in B flat is going to be a G minor 7. My 2 chord in B flat is going to be a C minor 7. My 5 chord in B flat is going to be an F7. And then my 1 chord is B flat major 7. So using the same Roman numerals, we can change keys. And this is going to be something that you need to look in your further studies of jazz harmony. Let me play this progression, and then I'll play this progression. Here it is in B flat. Okay, now before we finish up here, I want to just bring about one thing. This is called the 2-5-1 progression. You will hear people talk about 2-5-1 over and over again. It is probably the most common progression in traditional jazz, that is. I mean, a lot of times if you listen to really contemporary jazz, it's not used as much, but the 2-5-1 progression is very, very important in the study of jazz harmony. So we have, sorry. I can do that in the key of C. If I want to do it in the key of B flat, it sounds like this. In the key of E flat, it sounds like this. In the key of G, it sounds like this. And in fact, we don't even need to have the one progression, the one chord to define the key. In many jazz and Latin jazz situations, we sometimes just have a 2-5 progression. We don't even have one. If I look at this progression, I know I'm in the key of C. because I know that the G is the 5 chord, and as I said, the only place we find a G7 chord is in the key of C. D minor is the 2 chord. This is the 5 chord. What I'm going to do, I'm going to end up with our lesson today by playing you some 2-5 progressions. And in each case, I'm just going to play 2-5 of a particular key, and then I'm going to change to a new key. I will tell you what key I'm changing to. And what you'll hear is that by going to the 2-5 of that key, I will identify a new key, right? I'll tell you what the first one I'm going to do is going to be, and then I will continue from there. I'll go from C to B flat, and B flat's going to be this. And then I'm going to continue, and I will call out the different keys. And in each case, what I'm doing is I'm playing the 2 chord in that key and the 5 chord in that key. And it's enough to identify that key. And if you're improvising, that's the key. If I'm improvising over this, I play in the key of C. Improvising over this, I play in the key of B flat. So here we go. Here's C. 2-5 and C. Here's 2-5 and B flat. I'm going to go 2-5 in G. Now 2-5 in F. And then back to C. So you see how that works. And one of the things that we do when we're looking at chord progressions is we look for 2-5 progressions. We look for all types of different things. Okay, at this point, I'd like to just finish up our discussion of theory. If you're brand new to this, we started out in lesson 1 with here's a major scale. These are triads, and went through quite a bit of material. If it's new to you, and hopefully this was a good review, I think you can see that there's a lot of exciting material out there that you can pursue as a jazz musician. And one of the great things about this is that every time we play jazz, we reinvent it. And I just have to say that I play all different styles of music, or most styles of music. I find that when I play jazz, there's just a real special feeling about invention and creativity and individual expression. And I highly recommend that you get into the study of jazz improvisation and jazz composition as well. Music theory, the jazz theory we kind of got to at the end of today, will help you to improvise over chord progressions, and hopefully will allow you to think about your own chord progressions, write some tunes to play, and write some arrangements. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of camp, and hopefully we can get back to playing some live music soon, and wish you all the best of luck.